And hello again from WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal. I'm Josh Manning, Deputy Managing Editor for Assignment at the Western Journal. Joining us on the show today, Joey Chester, an assignment editor for the Western Journal, and also Caleb Gina, assignment editor for the Western Journal. That's right, there's almost no one doing assignments at the Western Journal right now. Thank you for joining us this Wednesday afternoon. We are glad you're here, bringing you very interesting stories this afternoon. We've got big news about COVID immunity rates and what's happening there. Interesting word from vaccine producers and from the government, new studies. We're going to be going over those. Also going to talk about comments from Vice President Kamala Harris, pardon me. She has been out and about talking about Indigenous Peoples Day and how evil how evil American settlers were. She thinks conservatives are evil too, no doubt. But first, Joey has what I've got to say. You know, I'm normally biased toward my story. We got to say, Joey has, I think, the best story of the day here, and it has to do with what's happening in Loudoun County, where parents have been almost in open rebellion against the local school district. And a story has come out that's going to blow the chasm between the parents and the school board. It's going to blow it wide open. Tell us about that, Joey.
Yeah, you know, there has been so many stories lately about parents going viral at school board meetings dealing with things like critical race theory, pornographic books showing up on library shelves. I mean, just terrible stuff about the people who are running the education system. And I have to say that this story is by far the worst story that I have seen out of a school board. Back on June 22nd, Scott Smith showed up at the Loudoun County School Board meeting. He showed up because there was a policy discussion to implement a new transgender bathroom policy. So basically, you know, a student could use the bathroom that they supposedly identify with. When the parent showed up, he was confronted by a LGBT member, and there was a shouting confrontation, and a police officer arrested him, bloodied his face, and dragged him out. And we have a clip of that I want to show you guys just to set the scene of what's happening here. Let's roll that now.
June 22nd, at a raucous Loudoun County, Virginia school board meeting, Father Scott Smith demands answers and claims the board is stonewalling. He was dragged out and arrested in a since-gone viral video. He claimed that a boy in a skirt sexually assaulted his daughter in a school bathroom. Loudoun County Schools interim superintendent Scott Ziegler reportedly said at the June 22nd meeting that the school never had any such incident.
But the predator transgender student or person simply, it does not exist.
So take note of that last part from the member of the school board, that the transgender predator student does not exist. And he's not the only school board member that claimed that there's no incident of or no allegations of any transgender students committing any sort of sexual acts towards.
So they say the
students.
dad's just lying?
Yeah.
Well, making it up.
He was dragged out before he could even tell the school board or the members of the community what happened. But I think other members raised concerns over, you know, what the potential repercussions of a policy could be. And they went on to say, oh, this doesn't happen. You know, this is just all made up. It's conservative mumbo jumbo. But that is not true. The father claims, this is all an allegation at this point and based on police reports, that his daughter was raped in the school bathroom of a Loudoun County school district by a male student wearing a skirt. And he's claiming that the school district has tried to cover it up. They have not addressed it. When he went to confront the school on the incident, the school told him that they wanted to investigate it in-house and issue punishment in-house.
Yeah. Wow.
And not
for an alleged rape.
Yes.
They want to issue the punishment in-house.
Yes. And not report it to the local authorities. The father did report it to the local authorities, and they have confirmed that there was an incident that took place at the school that day with the allegations that he is claiming. So, you know.
So we don't have a name on it, but we have an incident report that matches what the dad said.
Because we're dealing with minors, cases are sealed, but they can still provide details like location and the allegations that were made, and those match what the father is claiming. But the school has repeatedly covered it up. They refuse to address it. They are still pushing for this policy. That's pretty shocking to me. This is, like I said, I think the worst school board incident that I have seen of 2021, which is saying a lot. What do you guys make of this? What does it say about school boards and the role that they play by engaging in this sort of cover up? What do you guys think?
I wish I could say, Joey, that this is something that shocks us.
Yeah.
But what qualifies as shocking in 2021 is not the same as it used to be historically. I think what we've seen time and time again is when somebody who is a part of one of the left's protected classes does something beyond the pale, then there's this intentional effort by a lot of institutions, by the mainstream media, by Democrat politicians to essentially cover for them. So we saw that happen last week in regards to the Arlington school shooter, where it was an African-American student, and there was a much different reaction based upon the student's race than you would have seen if that individual would have been a white person. So I think just in regards to this specifically, they're terrified of approaching this issue because of the trans subtlety running through it. At this point, I think it's hard for the school to be able to defend the positions that they've taken, but this is just something that I think is a part of a larger trend where when it comes to certain individuals and certain demographics, the left has no interest in approaching or confronting these people at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true. This actually takes me back to a story that would have gone viral if viral news was a thing years ago. This happened in my hometown. There was a young woman in the high school who alleged that she had been raped, and the school did not do anything to deal with the alleged rapist. She went home that day, didn't come back to school, and so they marked her as absence and gave her failing grades. So that's the idea of schools not understanding consequences and not understanding the actual need to protect students' safety, not their feelings, not their ideas, but to protect their actual physical safety has been an issue for years and years in the country. And what has happened, the left has done this very just diabolical, perverse sleight of hand, where now they're not nearly seemingly as interested in protecting students physically as they are protecting their feelings and as protecting them from having to confront ideas that might challenge their worldview. I can just imagine the conversations on the school board behind the scenes when they were talking about this. Oh, there was an alleged rape. Oh gosh, yeah, that's horrible. What were the details? Well, it was a girl who was raped. Oh my gosh, that's horrible. Who was who perpetrated it? Well, I'll tell you, it looks like it was a transgender person, a male who is identifying as a female. Oh my gosh, that changes everything. Yeah. We can't address this the way we were going to address it before. You can only imagine that conversations like that were taking place in the background. I have to think that they were, though I don't have a recording of it or anything. But right now, the goal of the left is not to protect the American people. The goal of the left is to continue metastasizing cancerous leftist anti-American thought, and that's what's happening. That's why you see what's happening at the border. You have people at the border who are saying, "Look, I've got illegals coming across my property. I'm terrified. I've had people break into the house. I've been threatened, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." And the Biden administration isn't about to shut down the border. They clearly are not interested in it. We looked at stories earlier. They have millions of dollars worth of construction equipment sitting there that they could use to build the border wall, and they won't do it.
Yeah, literally mounds of it.
Yeah. Millions and millions of dollars. So this is not about, the left is not interested in protecting the American people. The left's always been weak on that. There's a reason that JFK got us into the Cuban Missile Crisis and not Richard Nixon or Dwight Eisenhower. There's a reason the left has always been, liberals have always been more lax on security issues. So, what's happening is the essentially service of intellectual orthodoxy and leftist orthodoxy over the security of children.
Yeah, and before we move on, there's one more thing I just want to share about the case. The great Michael Austin, writing for the Western Journal, he writes, although juvenile records are sealed, the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office responded to a Daily Wire public records request by confirming that a report with offense, forcible sodomy, and sexual battery matched the date and location of Smith's claims, and that it does indeed exist. Smith said he'd been assured by prosecutors that the suspect in his daughter's case was being held responsible and was expected to plead guilty to a lesser sexual assault charge at a hearing scheduled for October 14th. However, on October 6th, a 15-year-old was charged with sexual battery and abduction after he allegedly forced a young girl into an empty classroom and assaulted her, according to a release from the Loudoun County Sheriff's Office. And, as it turns out, this is the same boy as the suspect in Smith's daughter's case. Various sources confirmed to Smith's attorney and the Daily Wire. And this dad is not some vengeful dad. I mean, he's even said, yes, he should plead guilty to a lesser charge. He's young. His mind is in the wrong place.
Yeah.
He's having mercy. Which is hard to do. I can't imagine being in that place. But you talked about consequences. It's like the consequences don't exist in situations like this. They don't issue consequences for these people. But we have so much of a larger issue here with school boards. Biden's DOJ would like to think of this dad as a domestic terrorist for going to the school board and confronting them for not addressing his daughter's alleged rape.
The FBI on him.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they might sick the FBI on me for even bringing it up on the show. I mean, this is the world we live in now. But it brings up a much more important point. You guys have got to get involved in your local school boards. You need to show up to meetings, not in a angry or vengeful way or in a way wishing to do people harm, but show up and make your voice heard. I mean, the education system is dominated by the left and it has been missing conservative voice for so long. So I just want to send this message to all the viewers. Run for local school boards, show up at meetings, make your voice heard, do something so policies like this that enable situations like this to occur don't happen any longer. Don't allow porn to sit on the library shelves of your child's school. Don't allow it. Show up and do something. Do you guys have a message for parents who are maybe dealing with situations like this with their local school board where they are worried about what is going on in their child's school? What should parents do?
Yeah, I think there's this natural tendency to wonder about, like you said, there's consequences for the parents in these situations and hardly ever the people that either committed these vile acts or were responsible for the decisions that were made. But something else that I've seen in the last week is there was a conference where they had a number of parents joining together and talking about this issue. And one parent made a great point where she said, this is just one of those things that you have to go to the mat for. Whether it's your faith, your family, your children, these are the type of things that regardless of what the consequences are, if it is an immense risk, that's a risk you've got to be willing to take. Because there are some things that we as conservatives have to be willing to basically die on that hill. And I think the way that your children are educated and the next generation is being raised has to be one of those hills.
Yeah, that's great.
That's good. That's it. And we have, I think you're exactly right, Caleb, and we have not died on those hills in the past. That's why academe is permeated with the leftism that it is. We've continued to send our schools to our kids to colleges that employ people who train teachers to act like this and who train their own students to act like this. How many of you either have had a child come back from college and found out the child had almost turned on you, or know friends who've had that happen? And the unbelievable fact of the matter with that is most of the time, the parents are paying for the child to be turned on them.
A big sum.
A big sum, a large sum. There's a massive student debt issue in the country, and we've paid for our kids to be turned against us. And then those kids grow up. I had a pastor who used to say, part of the problem in D.C. is that all of those people in 1967 in Woodstock who were rolling around in the mud and had love beads and long hair and all of that stuff, turns out they grew up, took a shower, shaved, and now they're in D.C. running things. And that was, exactly. And that's what happened happens, you're only ever a generation away from true disaster happening. And what's happened is we've let multiple generations now go. And this is the effect. People ask us all the time, what do I do? How do I fight back?
Yeah.
We get that question all the time. And the answer is not, most of the time, is not go to DC and be angry. Well, sometimes there's a time for that. But the answer is yes, run for your city council, run for your local school board, become an alderman. If you take over at the base, at the grassroots level, we can retake the country from the bottom up, which is what we need to be working on doing. Tip O'Neill, who's a Democrat, used to say all politics is local, and he's right about that. But the answer, again, we've gone super long on this segment, but finally, don't make the mistake of thinking that the culture is downstream from politics. It's not. It's the other way around. Politics is downstream from culture. What that means is that what's happening in the culture is afterward going to be reflected in politics. What's happening in the culture is afterward going to be reflected in politics. There are examples of the opposite happening. The best example of that is Bill Clinton and what that did to the prevalence and acceptance of lewd sexual acts and the acceptance of those. That's the only case I can think of off the top of my head where politics actually super influenced culture. It's normally the other way around. So yeah, run for alderman, run for the school board, but also get in church. Yeah. Get in church. Spend time discipling your kids. Have a neighborhood Bible study. Teach other kids in the neighborhood. That's the way that this actually gets fixed. The common refrain in the newsroom is that at the end of the day, Donald Trump isn't going to fix this. At the end of the day, the best presidential candidate out there isn't going to fix this. At the end of the day, Jesus is the only thing that can fix this. That's what got us through since we landed here 400 years ago. That's what's gotten us through. And that is the only hope for us going on. And we will talk more about what happened when we landed here in just a few minutes. But before that, I'm going to toss it to Caleb Gina. Caleb, you've been looking at new studies, looking at hope. You've been talking about looking at COVID, new studies, info on natural immunity. What do you have?
Yeah, so I wanted to take some time and just talk about the natural immunity saga and how the information on this topic has changed.
That is the right word.
Yes.
It is a saga.
Yes. Where we were at in the beginning of this entire experience is miles away from where we are now. And I think we have so much more better data that it should inform us to make different decisions, draft policies that actually make sense and do have statistical backing for them. So in regards to the natural immunity argument, I think that's been something that has been very seldom discussed, at least publicly, as in what's the data? How valid are the studies? What's the quality of these type of things? Because everybody likes to mention it, but I think a lot of us haven't necessarily, lifted the hood and taken a glimpse at really what's going on here. So the most credible study that I was able to find came out of Israel. It had tens of thousands of participants, and it was actually a study that was cited by Dr. Marty McCary, who is a Johns Hopkins doctor. He's also a regular Fox News guest. You might have seen him on Tucker's show. And some of the data in here is absolutely stunning. And it's something I think that actually should make us feel a little bit better about what our position is. And also, I think is a direct rebuke to the hysterical leftist policies that want to lock everything down and force people to take a medicine against their will. Yeah. So I think some of the stuff I just want to mention, some of the big bullet points. And I want to lead with the fact that this study has not been independently peer reviewed. So we're going to have to rely on the data that they provided us. But they first looked at two groups of people, one that had received a vaccine, the Pfizer vaccine, against people that had contracted COVID during 2020. And that was a group of about 46,035 people. The single most interesting data point to come out of that was that vaccinated individuals were actually 7 times more likely to have a symptomatic COVID infection than the people that got COVID naturally over the course of 2020. And they actually conducted a separate study where they had 16,215 participants looking at the Delta variant specifically, and the numbers were even more crushing, where people who had received a vaccine were 27 times more likely to have a symptomatic COVID infection. So in regards to the Alpha variant, the Delta variant, the data is clear that the natural immunity that's conferred upon you by overcoming the virus actually is far superior to the vaccine immunity that the medicine confers. So I think that's something that's really important when we're thinking about extrapolating this point and thinking about herd immunity.
Yeah.
Because what do the Democrat politicians always say? Why are we mandating the vaccines? We've got to get to herd immunity. You know, if we can just all pull together and go in the same direction, then we can get to herd immunity and we can all hold hands and sing Kumbaya and move on from the pandemic. But the bottom line is, and this was a point that Dr. McCary made, we're probably actually well on our way to natural immunity with, or I should say herd immunity, with a combination of natural immunity and vaccine immunity merging together into one very protected population. Because we've had over 44 million people in this country get infected with the coronavirus. What that means is we've got 44 million people that have a very strong level of natural immunity. And when you merge that number with the 150 million shots that have already been administered, that actually backs what we're seeing now, which is the numbers are dropping dramatically because we are actually much closer towards this ephemeral herd immunity that they like to talk about. So my question to you two is, why has there been so little oxygen in the news environment devoted to natural immunity? Like, is it because the vaccine manufacturers are pressuring people? Like, what do you think it is that they just don't really want to talk about this topic?
Well, I think their narrative for so long has centered around the vaccine and how everyone needs to get vaccinated. So if they were to back off of that now and say, oh, you know, maybe if you've had the virus, you don't need the vaccine, everyone would question what they have to say. Everyone would question Fauci. People would question the CDC and all these doctors that CNN and MSNBC have on all the time. There would be questions, rightfully so. I mean, I think people are starting to question anyways. And then I think you have to think about the profits of big pharma too. Think about how much money these vaccine manufacturers are making off of the vaccine mandate. You know, Biden said 99% of Americans need to be vaccinated before we reach herd immunity and we can get back to normal. But that's absurd. But think about how much money those vaccine manufacturers will make. Oh, and 3 months after you get your vaccine, you need a booster shot. There's more money in our pocket. So I think if they were to compromise on that, it would hurt the vaccine manufacturers. It would hurt the government. It would hurt all the pundits in the media. They would look like fools. So they're going to keep peddling this idea that everyone has to get vaccinated and natural immunity all of a sudden is just non-existent. They're going to ignore 100 years of science just to push their agenda.
What do you think, Josh? Why are they burying natural immunity?
Well, I think Joey's probably right. I think you're probably completely right. They got super invested in it early on. The impulse of the left is to do something. The impulse of conservatives is to wait and conserve, wait and see.
Right.
I had a friend who used to say that the difference between conservatives and liberals is that conservatives won't destroy something until they've got something better to rebuild with. Whereas liberals they tend more toward action, even if the action is maybe not superior to the thing it's replacing. And the impulse was something like this, especially with the way the media hyped it, was, oh, good heavens, we've got to do something. You know, it's, you know, we could have tens of millions of people in the U.S. dying. And so we end up with Operation Warp Speed. And let's remember, the vaccines were horrible as long as Trump was in office. And then as soon as he was out of office, all of a sudden, the vaccines were just the best thing ever. Everybody's got to take them. I'm not so
sure about this.
Yeah, exactly. People, I've seen a rash of postings on social media showing people tweeting, a year ago, man, I'm never going to let that thing into my body. And then saying a week ago, if you don't do this, you obviously hate children, that kind of thing. So they're super heavily, so they felt like action was the thing to do. They're then super heavily invested in it because they've spent billions and billions of dollars on it. And then what happens? Do you come out and you say, oh, guys, by the way, maybe this is not all it's cracked up to be. An interesting thing, the WHO on their website used to say that natural immunity was superior to, that acquired immunity was superior to artificial immunity. They then removed that and said that in the case of COVID, artificial immunity was the preferred outcome. They then removed that and went back to a similar version of the original. Well, I emailed the WHO and I asked them, what's up, guys? What's the deal here? And they responded to me once explaining why they went from acquired immunity being better back to, artificial immunity being better back to acquired immunity being better. And I said, okay, well, but I don't understand why you changed it in the first place. Why did you originally change it from acquired to artificial? And they never got back. They went totally silent, never responded to me. They were not interested in talking about that.
A Joe Biden.
They pulled a Joe. Yeah, they called the lid for the day, and they were done with Josh and the Western Journal. So so I think they're super, super duper invested in it, and there's a lot of. I've seen that happen before with other things that were not even in the government. People commit to something, a lot of pride gets in there. They're really afraid to show blood in the water, and so then you end up in the situation we're in.
Yeah, one final point before we move on, just to put a bow on this. The way I always think about the pandemic is essentially we're in a forest fire, and the virus will continue to circulate as long as there's logs to burn. But what the data coming out of Israel is saying is that everybody on Earth who has gotten the shot or has gotten COVID has already moved us significantly closer to that destination of herd immunity. So we are going to burn this pandemic out, but the irony is it'll probably be more due to the fact that people will have natural immunity in large numbers than they will have artificial immunity in large numbers. So I do think that there is some hope here. There is some optimism on the horizon, but we have to be willing to look at all of the information and parcel it through as opposed to whatever Fauci spouted on CNN for today. Because most of the time it's just nonsense.
Yeah, it changes with the wind. All right, thank you, Caleb. That's good. So hope, folks. There's some hope for you. Great couple segments there. We've gone super long, but that's okay because I didn't do a great job preparing for the next segment. We do, before we leave you, we want to talk about some comments from Kamala Harris, our beloved vice president, who
Kamala?
It is actually Kamala, like the piece of punctuation.
Kamala.
However, I am a very petty, small, vindictive person.
Me too.
And I try to intentionally actually use the wrong pronunciation. Yeah, the little interesting known fact for you guys, George H.W. Bush, during the first Gulf War, some people would make fun of him for calling Saddam Hussein Saddam. He always said Saddam Hussein. And nobody really knew why. And supposedly the difference in pronunciation is actually the difference between a name and an insult.
Oh,
and is that it's not Farsi in Arabic? I think it's Arabic. So anyway, funny pronunciations of names, but yeah, I normally call her Kamala because I'm again petty and small. But anyway, she was speaking, but so is she. So there we go. Two wrongs don't make a right, but they can make something funny. She was speaking yesterday at the National Congress of American Indians convention in Washington, D.C. And, this Columbus Day was this week, or as some people now call it, Indigenous Peoples Day. And she spoke to the group and she said, since 1934, every October, the United States has recognized the voyage of the European explorers who first landed on the shores of the Americans. Let me pause that and say, and until extremely recently, those people were celebrated as heroes. They overcame unbelievable obstacles and an entire ocean to cross over to the New World, and in so doing, opened up two new continents and essentially began ushering in the modern age. But she didn't say that. She goes on to say, but that is not the whole story. That has never been the whole story. Those explorers ushered in a wave of devastation for tribal nations, perpetuating violence, stealing land, and spreading disease. We must not shy away from this shameful past, and we must shed light on it and do everything we can to address the impact of the past on native communities today. What's interesting is I'm not positive how we address the impact on Native communities today, other than we take the descendants of people who would have been killed by the natives back in the 1600s and somehow do away with them. What happened? You did have you had a measure of violence with European explorers. The entire world was, well, what's the way to put this? The civilized world was more violent at that time. There's a story about the practice of sati in India, and when the British occupied India, they were horrified to see widows being burned on pyres that had their husbands on top of them. And there's a story of a British colonel, I think it was, I can't remember his name, but he asked what was happening. They said, well, when a husband dies, we burn the widow along with the husband's body. And the next day, the same fellow who explained it to him saw some construction underway, and he went to the colonel and he said, what are you building? And the colonel said, well, that's a set of gallows. And the fellow said, well, what do you use those for? And he said, well, we use those to hang people who burn widows on pyres on top of their deceased husbands. So yeah, there's violence. That is violence. Hangings are violence. And it was meted out a lot more commonly then than it is now. But make no mistake, the tribes that the Native Americans, both North and South, those tribes were not necessarily incredibly peaceful. Many of them were incredibly warlike. They were brutal. There's a reason that scalping has passed into the common lexicon. It was a real thing. We also know that in South America, natives there were unbelievably brutal and would sacrifice other human beings, but they would sacrifice even children to their gods. The idea now, when the Spanish explorers came, when the European explorers came, they did use tough, difficult means, but the point was never extermination. The point was not to clear out the land of these people so that they could have it. The point was to expand their nations, to actually bring in new citizens to the crown, and you would see that happen from time to time. But this idea, and the thing, by the way, that killed the vast majority of people was not European violence. It was disease. And of course, that's not a deliberate thing. We didn't even know the germ theory of disease until that time. We didn't have it for, when did that start popping up? It's the mid 18th or 19th century. I can't remember which. So we were hundreds of years away from that. They didn't know what was causing it. So there was certainly no intentionality behind most of that. It was very sad. Now, that does not mean that we didn't make mistakes as well. Smallpox-infested blankets were a horrible thing, not a good thing. But the deal is, conservatives have never acted like the American experiment was perfect. It is an experiment. It's a project. It's ongoing. Kamala actually hinted on that, but then she messed it up. She said, our country was conceived on a promise of equality and opportunity for all people, a promise that, despite the extraordinary progress we've made through the years, we've never fully lived up to. That's especially true when it comes to upholding the rights and dignity of indigenous people who were here long before the colonization of the Americas began. A couple of problems with her statement. The first one is the idea that we would ever actually get there. We will never arrive. We are fallen. We are messed up human beings, all of us, indigenous people, Europeans, and the folks we've got now. We are all messed up. We will always be trying to get closer to the ideal. But let me tell you something. The United States of America has come closer than anywhere else. We're the last best hope of humanity. We have pushed this farther than anyone else. And the left absolutely refuses to acknowledge that. If Kamala if she actually believed in what she was saying, you and I were talking about a new directive from Homeland Security. They're going to stop raiding businesses that use illegal aliens. What that means is that you've got illegal aliens who are then going to be allowed to work in places that completely exploit their labor, have them in horrible conditions, and pay them $1 an hour. And there's nothing the government will do about that. That's an enormous problem. If Kamala actually believed that that indigenous peoples and that poor people deserved better treatment, then they would absolutely be raiding those businesses. They're not. And so they're not raiding the businesses, but they're not closing the border either. That means they absolutely do not care if these people are exploited as long as they get votes from the left. That's all that matters. So at the end of this, what do we take away from it? Well, we take away the idea that the American experiment will never be finished. We are always journeying toward the ideals laid out in the Declaration and in the Constitution. The founders themselves knew that. The idea that slavery still existed when the Republic was founded and continued to exist is not it's not damning to the Republic. It's that the founders themselves, brilliant as they were not able to figure out a way to bring the country together and get rid of slavery, but they believed that it would happen one day. You can look at their writings on that. And sure enough, it did happen. We fought an unbelievably bloody war so that it would happen one day. And Kamala and those on the left seem wholly uninterested in the fact that we fought that war and the forces of freedom won in the end. So she doesn't give America nearly enough credit. I'm not positive you can give America too much credit on this issue. Columbus and the other explorers should be celebrated and heralded. They were brave men. They provided a place for the Puritans to go and start a new life that imparted Puritan work ethic to the Americas. That made sure that we had a specifically Christian founding, and it changed the face of the earth. That is something, and the people who are responsible for that are worth celebrating, in my opinion. And that is it for us on WJ Live today. We went long. I was probably the worst perpetrator. Maybe I prepared for this better than I thought.
That was very good.
Thank you. That is going to be it for us for today. Remember, we're here every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. We will be back Friday with more stories and hopefully excellent analysis and conversation for you. If you're watching us on YouTube, be sure to click the subscribe button. After you click that, a little bell will show up. Click that bell. That's going to mean you get notified when we go live. Additionally, if you would like to support us directly, you can always go to westernjournal.com/join. That's westernjournal.com/join. We exist solely because folks like you watch us, read our articles, and support us. If you only watch us and read our articles, we're so thankful for you. If you feel led to additionally support us, we're thankful for that too, but only do it if you feel led to. For Joey, for Caleb, for all the folks in the booth, I'm Josh Manning. This is WJ Live, and we will see you Friday.